Hanukkah Sameach. Very interesting discussion on the radio yesterday about how we greet each other on this Chag. You know, on Purim, we actually say Purim Sameach. You do hear some people saying Hanukkah Sameach. On Pesach, Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Of course, on Rosh Hashanah, Shana Tova, Yom Kippur, Gmar Chatima Tova, or Tzom Mo'il, may it be a meaningful fast. And they were having a contest for somebody to come up with an appropriate greeting for Hanukkah. Some say Chag Urim Sameach, from the word or, in plural becomes Urim, holiday of lights. But they said, no, we need something else. Anybody want to quickly? A greeting that you would wish upon somebody.
Hi, Bracha.
Hi.
Hi, Stan. Remember Sid Brickman?
I certainly do.
He was a very funny guy.
Yes.
And he would say Merry Shabbat and Merry Hanukkah.
Yeah. You know what else he did? If you had the privilege of being at his Pesach Seder, he would immediately, right at the start, pour intentionally a glass of red wine on the tablecloth. You know why he did that? To make any of his guests and every one of his guests feel comfortable in case they ultimately, yeah. We found out how funny he was when one Shabbat, when we first arrived, one of his kids' sons was bothering him and he said, go play on the 401. We didn't know what the 401 is at the time. That was very funny. No, he was quite a guy, together with his wife.
With Sarah, yes.
Yeah. And you know the story, and then we'll continue. He was
I have one, Bracha.
So it's appropriate. So this
I have one.
Sydney, wait, Elliot.
I have one.
His father, Sydney was from England. His father had a ticket on the Titanic. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. No.
And he came down with the flu, so he could not go on that cruise.
Wow.
So aren't we grateful?
I have one, a quick blessing I've been saying to everybody, Bracha.
Yes.
May Hashem shed his light upon you.
Amen. Very nice. Now, I'm not going to tell you which bracha won on the radio. I'm going to let you think as we go through our texts, and you can keep that in the back of your mind. One of them is based on something that we'll be looking at. Okay. So a few things from this week. I had a message from my sister, quickly, go on channel 12. And I met there Eliezer ben Yehuda's grandson and great-grandson. And the grandson, they were interviewing them. His name is Eliezer. And I forget what this great-grandson's name is.
Itamar Raz.
Thank you. And remind me what Itamar Raz does.
He's an internist specializing in diabetes at Hadassah.
Right. Okay. Now, and how do you say diabetes in Hebrew? Because part of the interview had to do with Oded Ami, the broadcaster, asking, how do you think your great-grandfather, your grandfather would feel about such terms as, well, I'm going for a manicure, or however you pronounce it, something like that, and all of these other anglicized words. And he said, he would say, you should not say that, but you should say, from the root of nail, tziporin, I'm going lehitztaf rain. So remember that. Anyway, that was a thrill seeing them. The second, let me know when you've had this happen to you in Toronto. there's a supermarket franchise called Osher Ad. And the other day on the intercom in Bnei Brak, they announced all Kohanim, talking about Sidney Brickman, who was a Kohen, all Kohanim must leave the supermarket. Why? Someone had just died.
Died. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, two of our classmates shared with me this week interesting material. And I want to recommend first, Brenda Fox Edelstein recommended a documentary called, if you haven't seen it, Cinema Sabaya. Very highly recommended. It's a group of 8 women, 4 Israeli Jews, 4 Israeli Arabs, and it is not about politics or the conflict, but they are in chug, a class to learn how to make films. And it's fascinating as women, and women coming from different traditions, what you find out about them, because they become very open with each other. Highly recommended. Cinema Sabaya.
The CBC this morning on The Current had an interview with the director and some of the women. So yeah, if anyone wants to look it up on the CBC, you could also get that information.
Okay, thank you. And the next, Bev shared with me a very brief video. The New York Times in 2000 was celebrating its millennium and 100 years for its existence. We're not always thrilled with what they write, but it's worth mentioning this. And they had 3 front pages. The first was from 1900, the second one from 2000, and the third from 2100. And there were featured there articles like, should robots be allowed to vote? They wouldn't do worse than what we do, I guess. But on the bottom of the third page, it said, candle lighting time for New York, January 2100. Very curious. And so people asked the manager of the New York Times, who was an Irish Catholic, why? And I'm quoting him as he responded, "We don't know what will happen in the year 2100. Impossible to predict the future, but of one thing you can be certain. In 2100, Jewish women will be lighting Shabbos candles." Yeah, and now talking about another type of candle. You know that there are certain mitzvot that women aren't obligated to observe, though they can. And one of those is lighting Hanukkah candles. Certainly because there were a few women who were directly involved in helping out our people.
But
Judith is one, but we're going to read about another unknown story, for the most part, about another woman. And now this was also on the radio. The woman.
But Hannah, Shabbat candle is traditionally the women do it, but the men can light a candle too.
Yes, they can. But the point that I want to make, Esther, is a woman was being interviewed who is a professor of different rituals and customs of different parts of our people.
Okay.
And she said that she has a friend who goes walking around to many stores right before Hanukkah. Why?
Mhm.
If you can see these two candles I'm holding,
Mhm.
you can see that one is taller than the other. Why? Because there is a tradition that once you light the Hanukkah candle, which only has to last 30 minutes, that women should not do any work. Leave preparing a meal, leave doing your laundry, nothing. So her friend goes searching for the tallest candle so that she has an excuse to not do any work. So all kinds of very interesting traditions that we have, some of which we assume are holy, not always, not always. Anyway, to walk around the streets here at night, again, is just such a beautiful sight. People lighting candles outside in glass boxes. Beautiful. So let me share our screen. Okay. Now, I want to ask you, I'm reminded of my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. Many of you knew him, Louis Fetter, who was a chazan also. And very often, when he was going to sing a song in public, he knew which song he wanted to sing. It didn't matter what time of year, but he'd say, you know, since Rosh Hashanah is only 6 months away, I'm going to sing Rosh Hashanah. And so I'm asking you now to think about something that you're going to find a little bizarre, since we would think about it on Pesach. Why do you think God chose to reveal himself to Moshe, to Moses, through fire? Remember the story of the sneh, the
Mhm.
burning bush, and God speaks to him initially from fire. Anyone? Why was that his means?
Well, fire, light. I'm thinking of light. God created the world with light.
Okay, but I'm asking, why did God choose to speak to Moshe through that medium of fire, light?
I was just thinking that maybe it has to do with the fact that it was that the sneh eno ukal, because while the fire was burning, the bush was not.
Wonderful. Nechama. It has everything to do with the fact that it's burning and it wasn't consumed. And if we look at our text, the Midrash explains what must have been the motive for God choosing that as the medium. And also keep in mind that fire can be destructive, but it also can be constructive.
Mhm.
We have many variables that can play both ways. So the Midrash says, because Moshe was pondering that perhaps the Egyptians would succeed in destroying Israel, God showed him a fire that burns but does not consume. He said to him, just as the bush burns in fire and is not consumed, so too the Egyptians will not be able to destroy Israel. In other words, there will be light instead of darkness, ultimately, and have faith. A wonderful message. And we see that in a number of places. Now, this notion of or acharei choshech, light coming after darkness, actually first came to be in Breshit, in Genesis. Look at what we have here. So, God called the light day and called the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning, a first day. And we all know that we begin our day
In the evening.
at night, in the evening. So we have the same metaphor for light coming after darkness. Former Chancellor of JTS, Ismar Shorsh, elaborates on this order beautifully. More deeply still, it is to imbue darkness with light, fear with faith. When envisioned as the start of a new day, night loses its dread. It becomes a time of preparation, renewal, and anticipation, a period of incubation before a new birth. Life is punctuated by all too many moments of defeat and despair. Judaism urges us to face them and force meaning from them through context and perspective. To launch our days at night is to muster the courage not to take refuge in denial. Our capacity to master the nightmares that haunt us is greater at the start of a day than at the end. And so, each evening, we link life to darkness as we pray in the Ma'ariv service that God enable us to retire in peace and restore us renewed to life, sheltered by the wings of the Almighty. Beautiful. We know that there's a certain atmosphere at night, a dread. And of course, that's why we quickly say upon waking up, Modani, how grateful we are. It also alludes to the fact that light is that much greater when we contrast it with darkness. And I'm suggesting now that light, as we use it metaphorically, stands for something positive, happy, as opposed to the darkness of something sad or, God forbid, evil.
But also knowledge. Like you say, I saw the light.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, for sure. It's a metaphor in a variety of contexts, of course. Now, light, and this passage, for example, and what I read up till now, is very inspiring. And when we look at a fire, or even around a campfire, we get into a certain mood. A fireplace creates a certain atmosphere. But lights for us are meant to go beyond inspiration, and the Hanukkah lights are meant to go beyond remembering history and remembering the miracle of the oil. As I often suggest, there's a role for us human beings. Yisrael Jeskowitz writes the following: lighting candles is certainly a beautiful and inspiring act to do. We bring in and exit Shabbat and every major holiday with candles. Think about it. There is so much warmth and light that a little flame can provide. But it is deeper than this. There is a well-known verse in the book of Mishlei, Proverbs, Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, which means the candle of God is the soul of man. Now, what does this mean? The analogy is comparing man to a candle. A candle, as we know, has two components, namely the candle which holds the wick and the flame itself. Each person, as we know, is comprised of both a body and a soul. The body is the physical part of us, like the candle, and the soul, which is the flame. The body serves to house the soul, much like the candle serves to house the flame. We should all be seeing this in front of us. The verse is saying that God has implanted into each one of us, and we'll get back to that, each one of us a candle that is a part inside each of us to hold the divine essence itself. But we need to find that candle and ignite the spark by doing deeds to bring godliness into the world. By bringing godliness into the world, we are in reality using the candle God has given us, using the soul for its true purpose. Now, what word could we substitute for when it says each one of us needs to find that candle and ignite the spark by doing deeds? How could we rephrase that? Each one of us needs to know what his or her.
To me, it's a spiritual.
Well, my claim is going to be, it's not meant to remain at the spiritual level. Each person is meant to find that spark
for their role and goal in life.
Okay, I was looking for the word passion.
Passion.
Everyone finds that passion, you know, I'm hot with that passion, I'm on fire, literally, not literally, and the passions are going to be very, very different. And no one can say, except for a few things, that this passion is less important than another passion. But let that passion be for something that's going to contribute to the betterment of the world.
So tell me the difference between spiritual and passionate.
What I meant was that I'm suggesting we don't want to just remain on an inanimate spiritual level, but it's got to take us to do something, actually do something.
But to me, it's obvious. To me, it's a given.
Okay, all right. Now,
I think that's why when I think of the Hanukkah story, to me, there are two stories, the Hashmonaim and the menorah. And to me, the story of the menorah is the more important of the two. Because
well, we discussed that in our first session, that the courage that it took to go back to the temple and to light the candle, yes, is very, very significant. Now, this call for human action, I believe, is reflected in the well-known debate between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, the schools of Hillel and Shammai, regarding the lighting of the candles. So, and we know that ultimately we go by Beit Hillel. But what was the difference? in that Shammai said we should, on the first night, light all 8 candles, and then as we progress, light 7, light 6, decrease.
But
We don't go by that. Beit Hillel suggested, and that's how we do it, is that we start with 1, and each day we ascend, we add. And there's a Hebrew phrase, partly Arabic, ma'alin bakodesh,
Yeah.
that whenever we are dealing with something that can be considered holy, we ascend rather than descend. Now,
but
there
why
has to be a reason behind each one's thought. And I'd like us to look at that now.
But
So
what
Beit
about
Shammai,
halachas that says 1 candle is enough?
but we're not talking about that right now.
Okay.
That's something, but it's not part of this. So Beit Shammai explained why they felt that it should be going from 8 down. Psychologically, and it's an interesting perspective. Psychologically, the Jew lighting the candles will be reminded each night that after that first initial effort, if we think back to the Maccabees and how dangerous and the risk they were taking to light that menorah again. So once they did that, they had to have, if only for a moment, a sense of relief. So again, psychologically, the Jew lighting the candles will be reminded each night that after the first effort, the goal of nurturing Kedusha, holiness, in the world will be easier as anxieties lessen. Believing the goal is attainable strengthens one's determination. Okay, once you see that, wow, I was able to do that, I will be able to do the rest. That's a wonderful perspective. Now, usually I would have asked you, but you've seen already and you might have read it, what do you think was Beit Hillel's reasoning? Now you might suggest something else, but let's see what we have here. So they say, go from 1 up till 8. Kedusha, holiness, is nurtured by an awareness of our historical past, the lights we have lit in the past. We add to this past with our present lighting. Okay, so it's saying, when we're lighting, and perhaps this is very important for the children that are standing around us, we're adding because we're confirming and we're acknowledging that people before us, our ancestors, ancient ones, medieval ones, and contemporary ones, have been eternally lighting these candles, and we are continuing this. And we're building on that past. And not only are we building on the past, we also now are contributing to lighting the menorah, and hopefully, going back to what we just said, contributing light in another way. Now, the truth is, I read an article recently that I'm thinking of at this moment. It was either from the Reform or the Reconstruction movements that said that they use this notion of ascending order and acknowledging what we do in the present, that's also a call for maintaining the past, but also developing
Mhm.
and evolving, which is interesting as well. Now, there's a simple story that is shared, and the intent is nurturing the sensitivity to the need to always increase light based on this debate. באחד מימי החנוכה הדליק הרב יהודה צדקה את החנוכיה שהציב בפתח ביתו בשכונת בית ישראל שבירושלים. One of the days of Hanukkah, a Rabbi Tzedakah, nice name, lit his menorah, as I said, many do, outside the opening of his home in Jerusalem. בחצר הבית שיחקו באותה שעה כמה מילדי השכונה בכדורגל. At that very moment, some little boys were playing football right near there. ומבלי משים בעט אחד מהם בכדור חזק כל כך עד שפגע בחנוכיה. One of the kids, not intentionally, kicked the ball so hard that it hurt, it made the Chanukiah fall down. It fell down, and of course, the candles and the oil came out onto the ground. נבהל הילד ורץ לביתו לספר לאביו על התקרית המביכה. The boy ran home to his father, all embarrassed, and told him about the incident. יצאו השניים אל הרב צדקה להתנצל. They went immediately to apologize to the rabbi. כשהגיעו, סיפר הילד בחשש את מה שאירע וציפה לגערה. The boy very quietly told the rabbi what had happened, and he sat there expecting to be scolded. להפתעתו, הושיב אותו הרב צדקה לידו. To his surprise, the rabbi sat the young boy next to him. הציע לו ממתק, and he offered him a candy. והסביר לו במאור פנים, and with a very pleasant face, he explained משמעותה של הדלקת הנרות בחנוכה, the meaning of lighting the candles on Hanukkah. And he even invited him to come light the candles the next day with him. לפני שיצאו, אמר האב, before they left, the father said to the rabbi, כבוד הרב, great rabbi, חשבתי שתיגר בילד על שהפיל את החנוכיה. I thought you would have reprimanded my son for what he did to your Chanukiah. Heshiv lo harav tzedakah, the rabbi answered and said, Im kach chashavta, if you thought such, harei shelo hevanta et Beit Hillel. If that's what you thought was going to happen, you did not understand the perspective of Beit Hillel when they said, Mosif v'holech, hakol b'ma'or panim, that it's for us to increase light. And what this story, why I find it so precious, is that he's realizing the fact that the Chanukiah dropped. I hope it wasn't an expensive one, if it got blemished, or that the oil spilled. Anyone who would have gotten angry, and it would have been a natural reaction, is missing, he says, the point that we are meant to take the lighting of the candles as inspiring us, teaching us how important it is to bring more light into the world. So of course, I wasn't looking to reprimand or frighten your child. And maybe this is an interesting educational, didactic question. You know, do you achieve more when you need to give a consequence to a student, a child, anyone, by being rough, hostile? Or is it better to try to do it through this positive reinforcement without wanting to sound too much like people of the 21st century? today in education. So now Rabbi Tzedakah, one could say, encapsulates the message of the following two songs, both of which I'm sure you're familiar with, certainly one of them. So we see this one that was written back in the days of the pioneers by Sarah Levi Tanai. Banu choshech legaresh. We have come to chase away the darkness. In our hands, biadenu, our light and fire, each of us a small light, and together a mighty light. Go away, darkness, flee, blackness, go away in the face of the light. Now, I see in Rabbi Tzedakah's restraint from being angry an approach to expelling darkness at times. Why do I say at times? We're not talking about when you have to be firm and strong, and we know what I'm talking about. But at other times, this is telling us in strong terms, we have to expel the darkness. And we do, friends. We're living in a frightening, crazy world, and we do have to expel it. And we have to make an attempt at every possible strategy. Sometimes strength, physical strength is called for, and at other times, I believe the approach that Rabbi Tzedakah suggests. Now, this is again what I am saying about not leaving it just to lighting candles with our families and singing songs, all of which are very, very important. But taking these songs and these messages to do something about it, and it's difficult. But I think many of us in this class, in our own way, with our own passion, do make attempts at doing this. And I'm not just saying that. I'm not just saying that. Now, before I go on, look also at the juxtaposition of we have come to chase away the darkness, and it also talks about us individually. That's a constant in our discussions. We act individually and as a group. Very, very essential. And of course, the more we act as a united group, as the song says, we will be an or a ton, a strong, strong light. Now, yes? Somebody else? Okay. Now, this reminds us of an interesting pasuk taken from Leviticus, Vayikra, talking about what will be in the tabernacle and till this day in our synagogues, the Ner Tamid. A perpetual fire shall be kept burning on the altar, not to go out. Do you find anything a little perplexing, puzzling in that verse?
Well, if it's a candle, you have to relight a new one.
Something else. In the Hebrew, Eish Tamid, okay? A perpetual fire. So if it's a perpetual fire, what do I find puzzling?
Well, you keep on adding oil.
But if it's perpetual, why should that have to be done? Why does it have to say it's perpetual, but make sure it's not going to go out.
It's up to us to keep it.
Exactly. Okay, don't look upon it as being automatic.
Is it also a reflection back to the original fire that Moshe saw on the mountain?
Go on, Zipporah.
Well, there's a parallel there. That's a fire. That fire did not consume, but kept on going. And in Vayikra, we're looking at the same thing. Maybe we do manually have to work at keeping it going, but perhaps it doesn't need it because it's the same bit of fire that's following.
Yeah.
Hebrew.
No, it's not.
Very nice.
Bracha, what about the fire within us, the fire for Judaism, to keep that going despite life's challenges? If that inner fire is always burning, hopefully it will be on the right path.
Well, that's what Hanukkah is all about. That's walking in the footsteps of the Maccabees. Not just that miracle, but that we are meant to keep that alive. Absolutely, Elliot. Absolutely. Can anyone think, are you familiar with, I'll say, an English song, a universal song that touches on what we just said as well? Think of songs that have to do with Hanukkah and candles, and we should all know it from many years ago.
Oh, Haviv Misaviv.
No, but I said English.
Oh,
And I'm doing that intentionally. Remember, we talked last week of retaining or maintaining our particular traits as Jews does not mean that we don't take from the best of the rest of the world. And this is one of the most powerful songs that Peter, Paul, and Mary
oh yeah.
gave us. What is it? Somebody?
Don't let the light go out.
Is that you,
Sorry?
Mel?
It's Mel, yes.
Yeah, you should have been in the choir. Okay, so let's look at those words. Light one candle for the Maccabee children, with thanks that their light didn't die. Light one candle for the pain they endured when their right to exist was denied. Light one candle for the terrible sacrifice justice and freedom demand. But light one candle for the wisdom to know when the peacemaker's time is at hand. Don't let the light go out. It's lasted, as Elliot said, for so many years. Don't let the light go out. Let it shine through our love and our tears. Light one candle for the strength that we need to never become our own foe. A great line. And light one candle for those who are suffering pain we learned so long ago. Light one candle for all we believe in, that anger not tear us apart. And light one candle to bind us together with peace as the song in our hearts. What is the memory that's valued so highly that we keep it alive in that flame? What's the commitment to those who have died that we cry out they've not died in vain? We have come this far always believing that justice would somehow prevail. This is the burden, this is the promise, this is why we will not fail. Don't let the light go out. Don't let the light go out. Don't let the light go out.
Bracha, I have something I'd like to share that is really along with what you're saying, a personal experience. Could I do it? Won't take long.
Quickly.
Yes, I remember I lost my wife 8 years ago, and speaking of light, anyhow, she had this Havdalah set she valued tremendously. It was placed on high. I attempted to bring it down and it broke. She could have responded with great anger to me, and she said, "Honey, that's okay." And I said, "I know it means a lot to you." And she said calmly, "It's okay, we can get another one." The football incident, and I'll never forget that. And I think of it many, many times about anger control. She reaffirmed her love for me, which meant more than that very valued Havdalah set.
Beautiful memory. Thank you. Thank you. Is anyone familiar with light art, light painting? Anyone? No? Zipporah, no?
No.
Okay. It's a photographic technique of using a moving light source, a flashlight, a glow stick, a light brush, even a cell phone today, to alter an image while taking a long exposure photograph. Its purpose? To create depth, detail, convey an emotion, or to make a statement. Light in art also is said to conquer darkness. And this leads us to a partnership that's called Sketchlight. Two women artists, Ray Wagner and Karen Eicher, they are light painters that use a photography technique. They are exploring all kinds of techniques. Some of their work highlights the abstract nature of light. They are inspired by the beauty of light in all its various forms. They are constantly searching for new color textures and tools. It is a technique that creates the impossible, records the paths of light into the picture, reveals something hidden in the real world. And this is how I got to this, for they are inspired by a quote by one of our greatest thinkers, Aleph Dalet Gordon, who said, "The light will not defeat the darkness as long as we don't stand on the simple truth that instead of fighting the dark, we must increase the light."
Very nice.
Now, let's look at two examples of putting this message into action. Standing up to darkness. And I said we would talk about a woman named Hannah, not the story of Hannah and the 7 sons. That we all know. This is the daughter of Matityahu, describes a series of decrees issued by the Greeks that differ radically from those Antiochus imposed on Judea in the 2nd century BCE. You remember that the first decrees were, don't observe Shabbat, don't have Rosh Chodesh, so to mess up the Jewish calendar, don't have a Brit Milah, don't keep Shabbat, don't study Torah. Well, years later, there were additional decrees. First, the Greeks issued a proclamation that Jews could not place a bolt or lock on their doors. So what do? To evade the edict, the Jews took the doors off their posts and surrendered their sense of honor, kavod. Then the Greeks decreed that any man who allowed his wife to go to the mikveh would be pierced by the sword. And so they ceased having marital relations. Then the Greek magistrates imposed what's known as the rite of the first night. Every Jewish bride on her wedding night would first be forced to have relations with the local Greek governor. Many refrained from marriage altogether. Now, this is from the Midrash. When the Greeks saw that the Israelites were not feeling the burden of their decrees, they issued a bitter and foul decree that no bride would enter the wedding canopy on the night of her wedding without having first gone to the governor of that place. Here again, the Jews show their muster and with sadness forgo marriage. When the Israelites heard, they wrung their hands and lost their strength and refrained from marrying. Until, I want to get to the part, The Greeks would sexually abuse the daughters of Israel, and this went on for 3 years and 8 months until the act of one daughter of Matityahu, the high priest who was engaged to a Hashmonean son, and Elazar was his name. You couldn't keep that secret. So when the day of the celebration came, they sat her on a palanquin or litter. And when the time for the feast came, all the elders of Israel gathered in honor of Matityahu, the high priest, and the son of Hashmonai. For there were none in that generation as great as them. When they sat down to eat, Hannah, the daughter of Matityahu, stood atop the palanquin, raised her arms and ripped her garment, and stood before all of Israel exposed, and before her father and mother and her father-in-law. When her brothers saw this, they were ashamed and bent their heads to the ground and tore their clothing and stood up to kill her. Hannah then proceeds to confront all those at the wedding feast as complicit with the Greek edict and exposes the patriarchal underpinning of rape culture. She said to them, "Listen, my brothers and my uncles, now that I have stood before you righteous ones, naked with no sin upon me, you are seized with zeal against me, but you were not so zealous on my behalf, sending me to that uncircumcised one so he could abuse me. Should you not learn from Shimon and Levi, the brothers of Dinah and Genesis, who were only 2 yet were zealous for their sister and killed the city of Shechem and risked their lives for the integrity of God? And God came to their assistance and did not destroy them. Yet you are 5 brothers, Yehuda, Yochanan, Yonatan, Shimon, Elazar, and over 200 young priests. Place your trust in God, and God will assist you. As it is said, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." And she opened her mouth crying and said, "Lord of the universe, if you will not do this for our sake, do it for the holiness of your great name that is upon us, and we will rise up in our vengeance." Her plea motivates her brothers to the proper path and rebellion. At that moment, her brothers were seized with zeal on her behalf, and they said, "Let us go and get advice as to what to do." They consulted with one another and said, "Let us take our sister and we will go to the great king and we will tell him, 'Our sister is the daughter of a high priest, and there is no one in Israel greater than our father. And we see that it is not fitting that she should lie with a mere governor, but rather with the king who is as great as we are. And then we will enter the palace and we will kill him and leave. We will start with his servants and relatives, then God will help us and exalt us." Now, you could be bothered by what they say, that instead of just saying it's our sister, but they put the blame on their father is so great. Now, I bring this, and we are not sure how truthful it is that it actually happened, as an example of action being taken. And this is one of the reasons, like Yehudi, for women being obligated, because this is stated as this was the cause, the straw, so to speak, that the rebellion got started. Now, if you are wary of this story, which was written centuries after the story of the Maccabees, this is what educator Ali Ezra Salzberg says. So what really happened? And what can these different versions of the Hanukkah story teach us? The book of Maccabees was written in close proximity to the events it describes, and scholars presume it to be largely historically accurate. Its triumphant themes emerge from an era when the Jews had relative autonomy and were free to praise zealous action. In contrast, the rabbinic texts, such as the one I just read, that relate Hanukkah to stories of sexual violence were written at least 8 centuries after the Maccabean revolt, and doubtless were primarily a product of the rabbi's imagination. The rabbi's obsession with stories of rape gives us a sense of the anxiety they experienced in the diaspora. Centuries after the Hanukkah story actually took place, Jewish communities told these stories about rape as an allegory for the emasculated position of the Jewish people in exile, often forced to abandon faith or weakened by competing religions. The helpless position of the virgin bride represents not only the susceptibility of the Jews to physical violence, but also the danger that enemy culture could penetrate and perhaps impregnate the minority. These stories also reflect a patriarchal perspective, suggesting that women are dangerous. They draw the attention of non-Jews. They are more vulnerable than men, and if impregnated, they are an avenue for the oppressor to infiltrate the nation. Further, these stories dramatize a class of people who are even more vulnerable than the men suffering under oppression. And the stories create the opportunity for the masculine heroes to eventually rise to their protection. Is this a long way of saying behind every great man is a great woman? But it's fascinating, just this explanation, whether it was actually real, but there was a sense of the need to stand up against that enemy. And if it took a woman, it took a woman, and it ultimately for the men to realize that they have to stand up in the tradition of the Maccabees. The last story is a contemporary example of standing up, and it is close to home. It's written by a Mr. Cohen, who lived in Toronto as a survivor of the Shoah. And it was in the Canadian Jewish News a long time ago, the story of the Hanukkah spoon. And he says, one of the items I smuggled out of Auschwitz when the Nazis moved me into camp number 8, a quarantine camp for those suspected of carrying typhus, was my spoon. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it would come to play an important role in my Jewish life and in those of some of the 500 or so other prisoners there. There were no other labor details in this new camp, but we inmates were ordered to help in its construction, which was underway. Having had some experience in the Lodz ghetto as a mechanic, I helped the electrical technician install the camp's lighting. With my new access to tools, I brought my spoon to work and filed down its handle, making it into a sharp knife. Now I could use it both to eat my soup and to cut my bread. This was useful because we would often receive one chunk of bread to divide among 2 or 3 people. And without a knife, it was difficult to apportion the bread fairly. Now I was regularly called upon to use my spoon knife to help avoid disputes and maintain relative peace among the prisoners. When winter came, though, my spoon became involved in an additional mitzvah. By then, we had transferred to camp number 4 in Kufring, a camp more similar to Auschwitz in its daily ordeals. Despite the horrendous hardships we suffered daily, however, we tried whenever possible to remember to do a mitzvah, the light within the darkness, and to maintain a self-image as God-fearing Jews, despite all the dangers that involved. Having always kept mental track of the calendar, I knew when Hanukkah had arrived. During a few minutes rest break, a group of inmates and I began to reminisce about how back home before the war, our fathers would light their menorahs with such fervor and joy. We remembered how we could never seem to get our fill of watching the flames sparkling like stars. how we basked in their warm, special glow, how they seemed to imbue us with a special sanctity. And then we got to thinking about the origins of Hanukkah and about the war for the Hashmoneans against their Greek tormentors who were intent on erasing Judaism from Jewish hearts. We recalled the great heroism of the Jews at the time who risked their lives in order to keep the Shabbat, practice circumcision, and study Torah. And we remembered how God helped them resist and rout their enemy, enabling Jews to freely observe the Torah and mitzvot once again. And then we looked around ourselves. Here we were in a camp where our lives were constantly in danger, where we were considered subhuman, and where it was virtually impossible to observe the most basic practices of Judaism. How happy we would be, we mused, if only we could light Hanukkah candles. Say a bracha to God. While we talked and dreamed, we were all suddenly struck, as if at once, by the same resolution. We simply must discover a way of doing the seasonal mitzvah. One fellow offered a small bit of margarine he had saved from his daily ration. That could serve as our oil, and wicks, we began to unravel threads from our uniforms. What, though, could be our menorah? I took out my spoon, and within moments, we were lighting the Hanukkah candle, reciting the blessings. We all stood around, transfixed, each immersed in his own thoughts of Hanukkahs gone by, of latkes, dreidels, and Hanukkah gelt we received as children. Our unusual Hanukkah menorah kindled in us a glimmer of hope as we recited the blessing about the miracles God had performed for our forefathers in those days. But also at this time, we well understood that the only thing that could save us would be a miracle, a great miracle like the one hinted at on the dreidels acrostic. The celebrated Viennese psychiatrist, Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was himself an inmate of Kaufering, asserted in his book, Man's Search for a Meaning, that to survive the concentration camps, a person had to have something larger to live for. Those with goals had a better chance to remain alive. Many Jews in the camps were good examples of that phenomenon, living for our Sabbaths, our Jewish holidays, and our daily recognition that there is an Almighty, whether or not we could never, ever fathom his ways. And I often felt that our convictions helped us cling to life when others sank to the depths of despair. Today, I am overwhelmed at times with gratitude to God for my personal miracle, my survival, especially when I am surrounded by the children and grandchildren he has granted me, all of whom are committed to a Torah study and observance. And the gratitude comes rushing in as well every winter when I light my menorah, a real one today. And as always, I remember my Auschwitz spoon, Hanukkah. If ever there was somebody who didn't light or let the light go out, I don't want to say anything more so as to be left with
Bracha.
that. Yes.
I want to enhance that by telling everybody who didn't know that the Jews in Kiev are lighting an outdoor giant menorah. And I was struck as you read that, how similar the situation is and how they're still celebrating Hanukkah.
Chabad has menorahs all over outdoors.
Yes, but the point of what Brenda's suggesting is, despite which we can't even begin to imagine, whether in the Shoah or our people, all the people in Ukraine, that they are persisting.
Yeah.
When one could say they have every right to say the hell with it.
Yeah.
So in Toronto, may it continue. It's easy to light that menorah. Let's be left with that message. And We've already lit our candles here tonight. May you light them and sing and be well. And I look forward to seeing you Shavua haba. Thanks.